when we talk about like women participating in the political sphere, even as like the queens of ancient India, were these queens always like people of their own merit, or were they quite often like somebody who had been a proxy, like just put into power by a man? Which is like sort of, the worry that you have with women in politics to a certain degree.
On the surface of it, I can pretty much name 19 queens from 19 different kingdoms around this country who ruled, where some of them were absolutely amazing military adepts. Like Razia Sultan was great on the field, right? When she rode a horse, when she fought in war, she was fantastic. Her brother was supposed to rule, but then she took over and she was much better than her brother in war.
Studies have actually shown that the women that have been elected in, to Panchayati Raj positions, they are shown to be more confident, assertive. They've championed women's causes, safety for women, education, welfare, health, nutrition. These are issues that women have tabled way more than men have. So, in terms of like the type of issues that a democracy talks about, if you're underrepresenting women to a large degree, then even the issues that we talk about in the democratic space are underrepresented. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Hi everyone, and welcome to Don't Run Into Glass, a podcast hosted by thecitizen.in. I'm Gayeti.
And I'm Anica.
And Anica, what are we chatting about today?
We've met after a long time.
Actually, we met yesterday.
We did. I mean, we meet on our own all the time. But yeah, we're recording the first episode of our podcast. And for those of you who watch our podcast, thank you for watching our episode 0, the feelings episode.
I know. That episode, actually, Anika, I got feedback being like, some feedback was like, oh yeah, that was cool. You guys like looked like you were, sort of really delving into your existential angst of why you're hosting this podcast. And a couple of people were like, wait, what was that about? But I think this
it was right in time with the Mercury retrograde. That I can say for sure. Like,
are we out of the Mercury red? Not that I believe in all that.
There's something happening all the time. There's something happening all the time. Anyway, but yeah, that podcast was quite a different one. But it kind of segues us into our new little format that we've come up with this time, right?
So we don't have a guest. That's the most obvious change. And I think the whole idea is that we're going to try and dive deeper into issues that are interesting to us.
Yeah.
And right now, of course, it's the elections. That's all anyone is talking about. Polling has begun.
Correct.
We're going to be voting in Delhi on the 25th of May. And I think we've hyped up this one to ourselves quite a bit as well, because we will be discussing women's participation in Indian politics.
Correct.
So just to cut straight to it, Anika, I wanted to ask you, because since you wear the hat of the historian amongst the two of us,
although both of us did history on it.
Both of us have studied history, yes. But since you wear the historian's hat, I would like to ask you, and I would actually like to get a bit of an understanding of what has been the role of women in Indian history as far as like politics is concerned. And I know that, Indian democracy is a fairly new entrant. We've had monarchy, and we've had kingdoms and dynasties of various kinds. But how did women participate in political life historically in India?
I think, first of all, if we go back into history and we see all the records that are available to us, and that could be historic writing by some scholars, courtiers who are writing down stuff, inscriptions, numismatic coins sometimes are issued in the names of kings and queens and whoever is ruling in that particular area. So considering all of these sources, we do get a lot of information about women as queens all around India, right? From Kashmir to central India, to East India, to West India, to South India, all parts of it. But there is and they rule for a significant amount of time.
The queens of India.
The queens of India. And they rule for a significant amount of time. And a lot of scholars do also consistently agree that their rule was, if it was not already, taken on during a period of turmoil, if they came on, it was a period of kind of calm. Calm and a lot of investment into the arts, culture, into administration to a great extent. And it was it raised a lot of questions in my mind about female participation back in the day. And I really tried to think to myself, what is it that they are participating in if you're not royalty, right? And obviously, it is holding positions of power, holding positions of being heard or representing a certain community. And one very interesting fact came out. I was reading this paper on the economic position of women in ancient India, and we'll tag that, and you should read it. One group of women who had a lot of economic sort of might, because not only were they educated by the state, but when they started dispensing of their services, they charged at a gradation that was socially accepted in large parts of India. And I'm talking about courtesans.
Yeah.
These women, essentially, you find some of them are called the ones that are the most eloquent, almost like the geisha tradition in Japan, very eloquent, witty, educated.
Is it comparable, the traditions?
There are a lot of researches on that matter, and if one has to really go deep into the courtesan culture of Asia at large. But having concubines, having courtesans was fairly common in several countries. It could be interesting to compare, but I wouldn't say something affirmatively in any direction in that matter. But in India, there were layers. There were 3 layers essentially that I found. The first was the Ganika, who was this state patronized courtesan, and most often had a voice in politics or representation in politics. Sometimes she came somewhere, we found inscriptions by their names. So I found that very interesting, because these people are also getting a voice. And historically, if you go into the queens also, there were queens in Orissa that were ruling for over 20 years. There were queens in South India, in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka, up till the modern period. And some of these queens, like Begum Samru, for example, who was a Notch girl in Delhi and then got married and then accumulated a wealth that was so vast. And she controlled an army of like about 50,000 Jat soldiers in a fairly turbulent time. And sometimes she helped, other kingdoms as well. So it's fascinating to see the rich history that has come through very, small sources. It's not as widespread. One cannot deny the fact that most of history during the ancient and the early medieval period is a male-dominated history and written by largely males. But that does not discount the fact of the few who were recorded. There are female academics, female medical practitioners, female poetesses, obviously. But those in those male-dominated arenas where they were participating. Now, one cannot say what is the regular political representation of women in those times, but I would assume if you're a woman in a position of power, you are kind of participating in that local sort of an economy.
I shouldn't be surprised, but when we study history, it's so much through the male lens, like whether it is, to a large degree, the people in power have been men, like the dynasties we studied while we were in college were pretty much all like male dynasties. And then when we were talking earlier, you even told me that there was a matrilineal female.
There's like several kingdoms in India that follow a matrilineal system, especially in the east and some parts of the south as well. It's a well-known fact right now. And it's funny because that kind of matrilineal system and then the kind of religious practice that is followed in those areas as well, the proliferation of the goddess religious stream that happened in India, obviously in mainstream Brahmanism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, but then the emergence of the Shakta and the entire religious philosophy that was developed, a religious system that was developed and taught, in the most fantastic universities of India as well. With the woman at the center. And most often the stories of those goddesses was quite gallant and quite, they are very ferocious deities, a large portion of them. Not all of them. Some of them are extremely benign as well, like Saraswati is a very benign goddess. Parvati is a benign goddess. Lakshmi is a benign goddess. But then there are these fierce goddesses that are called upon war. They drink blood from the skull cap. Oh my God, those stories are too fantastic. But we may digress if we go into that. that zone. But I think the representation of women in India also in religious systems, this is a big deal, I think, happened at a very early stage. And my personal investigation in the matter almost makes me believe it's like a feminist wave that happened in India, acknowledging the female body, acknowledging the female state. But a lot of other scholars would also criticize this perspective by saying that, yes, it has been imagined in a way where it's also demonified. And it has been glorified. And when it's demonified, it comes down to our present day society, all the bad names that a woman is called, and all the kind of curses, that, oh, is pe mata chal gayi hai, things like that. There are so many phrases like that, could be disturbing to hear, but are applied on women, So I think that does translate. But, Gayeti, I do also want to ask you this, because you are, and this is why I'm liking this new format of ours, because you are actually a journalist. You have been since 2014, right? You have a press card. And you've covered so many elections. I have seen videos of you.
I'm like the reluctant journalist, but
yes,
I guess I do have like a.
But I do remember those days when you used to cover those elections, and we used to be on the phone for hours discussing politics. We were so involved during that time. We were so concerned. We were so engaged by it. So now in India. Post-independent India, how is the female participation in politics? What does the picture look like?
See, Anica, now, absolutely, and I feel like on the surface of it, I think things look fine. I mean, I remember when I was younger, I was always told that India has had like a woman as a prime minister. We've had women presidents. Whereas if you look at America, I mean, it's unheard of that they could have like a woman as the president of the country. I mean, we saw what happened between Trump and Hillary Clinton. So in a way, it seems that like India is, of course, broken those gender barriers, and we've had women in politics. And I feel like in my own family, like I grew up with a political trajectory where women were very actively involved in politics. My mom contested the elections twice. She lost both times, but let's not talk about that. But my mom contested the elections. My great-grandmother was actually a member of parliament, and that's somebody who was born in like 1905. So it wasn't the men of the family that were in politics. I mean, there were men of the family that were in politics as well, but the people that I can really think about were like the women who have either actively participated in politics, have been, elected to positions, have been represented in like the Rajya Sabha and bodies like that. And, we have like political parties that are led by women even right now. We have, Mamata Banerjee, and we have Mayawati, and we have like big names.
And cultic following of these ladies like Jaya Lalita. Absolutely. There was a cult behind her,
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And we have incredible participation of women in local bodies. We have like, women's, like the village Panchayati Raj, it's like women that are heading those institutions. And you have women in local bodies. I mean, because we have reservation of women in 1994 in local bodies, you've seen a lot of empowerment of women in local politics, in local representational politics, which I think has been a phenomenal achievement of Indian democracy. So at various levels, you do see this really like encouraging picture that has emerged. Women vote, as many women as men vote. The voter turnout is as high amongst women as it's amongst men in India. So that's a very encouraging statistic. When you look at the local governance, women are, deeply embedded in local politics.
How is our voting as compared to some other countries?
In terms of percentages?
In terms of, our turnout in general.
I think it's 65-ish%.
I think we're on the higher side as a country that shows up to vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think 65% is considered very high. And it's equal amount, like 65% of women, 65% of men, I mean, give or take a few percentage. I'm just giving totally an average over here. But it's not as if only 20% of women are coming out to vote. Yeah. There is as many women that are coming up to the polling booths as men. So in terms of like exercising our right to vote and participating in Indian democracy, women are showing up, They're standing in queue, they're casting their vote, they're standing in local elections to the Panchayati Raj institutions, and women are demanding loud and clear that, hey, like, we want greater representation even in the Lok Sabha and in the Rajya Sabha. It's not good enough. So I think on the surface of it, it's an encouraging picture. I think we're going to dive a little deeper on like why it's just on the surface of it and why there are like issues behind the doors. But in terms of like a young democracy, and I still do think that we're a young democracy. I mean, 1947 is, in the larger scheme of things, not that long ago for a country that was like ruled through colonialism. And, you know, we've got a very complicated history in terms of how our politics is. It's not, let's not forget that like democracy is not something that just evolved here. It was something that was borrowed and adapted and imbibed from the West. And in terms of all of that, I do think that there is a deep democratic tradition that women of this country have embodied and have represented. But the same way, I think we learn so much from our past, and I want you to like sort of answer this question for me from a historical point of view as well. When we talk about like women participating in the political sphere, even as like the queens of ancient India, were these queens always like people of their own merit, or were they quite often like somebody who had been a proxy, like just put into power by a man? Which is like sort of, you know, the worry that you have with women in politics to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, because this is where the story really unravels out here. On the surface of it, I can pretty much name 19 queens from 19 different kingdoms around this country who ruled, where some of them were absolutely amazing military adepts. Like Razia Sultan was great on the field, right? When she rode a horse, when she fought in war, she was fantastic. Her brother was supposed to rule, but then she took over, and she was much better than her brother in war. You know, there was a queen in Kashmir who was known for her ruthless way of ruling as well. You know? So and these women, one consistent story also that I saw amongst a lot of these queens was that they ruled for a long time, sometimes when they were taking over after their husband passed away for a minor son, and then after he passed away for his son. And there was a queen that even was queen while her grandson was supposed to be, you know, crowned king. But they do so because they also become extremely shrewd and kind of hold on to that power with all their might. I mean, Begum Samru's story about her wealth still being a disputed fact and not being released is because she so tightly held it that it got very complicated. Who was going to inherit what she built? But they are regnal queens. They are, you know, they're regent queens. And it really paints a picture about the access and what we're really proud of. Is it a bit misplaced? You know, how does it function in present day politics? Tell me, Gayeti, because we've had, like you just said, a prime minister who ruled with an iron fist for a long time, that even today her opposition party is still quoting her acts to kind of make a comparison, right? And we've had women chief ministers, and very bold ones. I mean, Mamata Banerjee is amazing, right? Just as a personality in politics, there is so much going on with her. So in current day politics, how have most of the women been allowed to participate, or what route have they chosen, or how have they become part of politics?
See, I think even just the examples that you gave, like the regent queen, I think is so apt even today, right? Because Indira Gandhi, for instance, who we all, and by the way, all the women that I know of in politics, whether we know them or through the books that we read about them or the interviews that we see or however we know them, they do seem like pretty badass women, you know, and I mean that in the most incredible way. You've really defied societal norms and, you know, very deeply entrenched patriarchal challenges to like be there and show up and command that, you know. Yes. So it's incredible that women sort of like surpass and, you know, surmount all these challenges and get where they get. But most of the women in Indian politics, like the big names at least, are like sort of there by virtue of their connections to the men in power, right? Like if you look at Indira Gandhi, she was Nehru's daughter. If you look at Jayalalitha or you look at Mayawati, they're all there after like kind of like stepping in or standing in for the men that were in power right before them. And there are a few exceptions to this, of course, and I think that is increasing. But I feel like when you answer this question about women's participation in politics today, Anika, you have to look at it at various levels, right? I mean, there is, of course, one elected women in power. And here, if you look at the Rajya Sabha, you look at the Lok Sabha, I mean, it's really abysmal. Like you have maybe roughly 10% of the people in the Rajya Sabha and in the Lok Sabha are women. And again, this is a inaccurate average. It could be maybe 12 or 13 or 14%, but you know what I mean.
Low.
It's sub 15%.
Yeah.
So it is a low percentage of the number of women that are in that are represented in our highest levels of government. I don't think you can name those many women ministers either. We have, so it's largely very much male dominated at the elected level still.
Yeah.
And there has been an attempt to change this through the Women's Reservation Bill that was tabled in Parliament. It hasn't been passed. But I feel like
that bill has gone through a journey.
I mean,
every time it comes, once I remember the Parliament got shut down because of something when it had to be discussed and all of that. It's gone through a turmoil.
Completely. I mean, I remember, since we were in school, we've been hearing about this bill, and it dawned on me how old I am now. So when I say in school, I really mean a long, long time ago, I remember in our political studies class, we used to hear about this bill that was, being floated around or whatever it is. And now you're like, I mean, yes, it's been tabled, but it hasn't been passed. So far, it's still not been implemented.
Mm-hmm.
The number of women that are contesting the 2024 elections, yes. I don't have the numbers because we don't have the full candidates list yet.
Oh, but really?
Not all the lists are out, but I'm pretty certain it's not a very impressive number. I'm pretty sure there are political parties where the number of women are 10% or 15% or 6% in certain political parties. There are some, at least last year, that were last election that were better represented with close to 30% female candidates or women that were contesting. But it is nowhere close to the number of male candidates. So you're talking about an electoral democracy, whether it's, again, just to summarize it again, women that are in positions of power, whether they're being elected into the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, very low. Women that are contesting, not where it needs to be at. It's still pretty low, But when you look at, I think where the story really shines for Indian democracy is in the Panchayati Raj, where you have vast number of women that are now participating. And this is again because of the reservation that was accorded to women in 1994, where 33% of seats were reserved for women. Now, you might say that this is a proxy woman that has been put there. It was the guy who wants to
That's the general accusation.
That is the general accusation. But isn't that better than not having a woman at all?
Absolutely.
If someone's wife is going to be put on the table, if the argument is that oh, she's just a proxy, sure. But what is the alternative? To not have anyone there at all, to not have a woman represented there at all? And Anika's studies have actually shown that the women that have been elected in, to Panchayati Raj positions, they are shown to be more confident, assertive. They've championed women's causes, safety for women, education, welfare, health, nutrition. These are issues that women have tabled way more than men have. So, in terms of the type of issues that a democracy talks about, if you're underrepresenting women to a large degree, then even the issues that we talk about in a democratic space are underrepresented. Women's issues are underrepresented. And I don't want to say women's issues because healthcare and nutrition and welfare and these things are not women's issues. These things are societal issues. They're there for a healthy society.
Absolutely.
But women tend to talk about them more than men do. Yes. And if there were more women, maybe even in our Lok Sabha and in our Rajya Sabha, maybe you would have a more balanced electoral objective than we do right now. So I don't know, something to think about. But it is a murky picture. I think things have improved a lot over the last few years, just to sort of answer your questions. But we're nowhere close to equal footing.
Absolutely. And there was a party that you were mentioning that has almost 50% representation for women.
I'm going to just dig out the name. Give me a second.
Because it really intrigued me as to how someone would focus on that, and I would be very interested to know how they are faring. Obviously, they mustn't be faring so well.
Probably not, because I've never heard of them. They're known as the Naam Tamilar Katchi. And I might be butchering the name, so please really, really forgive me. This is my Hindi belt complete like bias here, but they're from Tamil Nadu, and in 2019 general elections, they fielded 50% of their candidates were women. In the total 40 Lok Sabha seats that they contested. And then in the 2021 Legislative Assembly election, also it was the same 50-50 ratio. And they offered 117 seats to women in the total of 234 assembly constituencies. So there are political parties that are doing it. But Anica, sort of to step back from why the scenario is the way it is, if you look at India, there are a lot of barriers to women participating in not just politics, but like in society. You have, and again, things are changing, but they were nowhere close to where they are.
Yeah.
Things are skewed against women from the time that you're like a fetus. You have female feticide rates that in India that are still higher than they should be. Your mothers, your sort of like infant mortality rates and your maternal mortality rate is still quite high. And even when it comes to education, your literacy rates, I think women are 77% and men are 84%. And you can just sort of like look at the traditional Indian home where like it is still skewed in favor of men. I mean, for just to look at gender-based violence inside the Indian home. Absolutely. We don't even consider rape if it's within the marital unit, Yes. So we're talking about a deeply unequal society where there are barriers to equality. Those barriers to equality are, of course, translating in the electoral space. And the space itself is pretty filthy. I mean, it's not easy being a woman candidate.
That's what they say, right? Like, that's the popular saying. If a girl was to stand up and say, I want to join politics, they say, wo gandi jagah hai.
Yeah.
They actually use colloquial terms in whatever language, wherever, but the same applies everywhere. Women are actually discouraged to a great extent to participate in politics as active participants, not passive participants, because it is considered a really unregulated place where all sorts of, sort of activities are going on that can be very improper for a woman to be around. And that kind of mentality still exists amongst large sections of the country right now.
I mean, and justifiably so to a certain degree. I mean, you can look at the attitude of some of our politicians to like women's rights. Like, I mean, there's some of the statements that like politicians have made regarding rape that have like shocked me to no degree, and they continue to make them. And these are people who are like in elected positions of power talking so casually about violence against women or about rape. And I'm going to read a couple of them out because they're really like horrendous. There was the former Karnataka Assembly Speaker who said that there is a saying that when rape is inevitable, lie down and enjoy it. That is exactly the position which you're in. He was speaking to somebody. But this is how casual the attitude about
it's
rape is.
It's like the locker room talk of Donald Trump. Like
exactly. Or like when Mulayam Singh Yadav said like, well, boys will be boys, meaning like rape is rape. And there are 1,000 such instances. I mean, I've compiled a few and I'm not even going to... So this one, I think, does stand out, that the Trinamool Congress leader, Tapas Pal, he was caught on tape threatening to let his men loose on his rivals. He was delivering a speech in a village in West Bengal, and this is from a while ago in 2014. But he said, if anyone from the opposition or their wives and sisters are here, then listen up. If any one of your people touches anyone from the TMC, I will destroy you. I will not spare them. I will send my boys and they will rape people. This is the political language of this country. So, of course, it is intimidating for a woman to go and insert herself in that space. And that's why I started with saying, like, all the power to the women who are doing it. I mean, I don't care if you happen to be related to the men in power or whatever reason might be, and people might discredit your own reason and your own status for being there. But all the power to you for, like, doing it, whether it's because of who your father is or who your husband was or who your son is, the fact that you're there and you're sort of willingly taking on this vile attack and this kind of like derogatory talk and slander on a regular basis as part of your gender identity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not an easy ask.
I want to read out something while you were talking about this. I referenced this paper earlier. It was Economic Rights of Ancient Indian Women by Sukumari Bhattacharjee. It was written sometime in the 90s. And her opening line of this entire article is, a perusal of various ancient texts indicates that there has never been a time when women's labor at home, however heavy, was regarded as productive. Women's sole worth lay in their reproductive role, and even there she was seen as the field, the harvest belonging to the seed owner. And that essentially she has come to the conclusion of, and she's made that statement after in detail reviewing literature from the Dharma Sutra. Now these are ancient texts that are guiding society. Now in India we always say that India did not have a sense of history writing, but what it did have is prescriptive literature writing, and this prescriptive literature was guiding society as to how to be, like the Manusmriti, so the Dharma Sutra and two later epics and a lot of Buddhist and Jain accounts. And it is through that she actually mapped out as to, first, the economic agency of women. Did they even get any money from their husbands, or were they allowed to work or do something? To a great extent, they were allowed to engage within the arts, but performance and all of that were, again, they had a certain taint associated with them. And then later on, it goes to actually those women that are coming from very high society families, the high caste families, the families that are really, really respected in society. They don't have that much money. Who have a lot of money? It's those courtesans that I spoke about, the Ganikas, the Naikas, and all of these ladies. And essentially, the reason I'm trying to tie this in is because most of the women actually got access either by who they were married into, or if they had the economic backing to bring together a certain retinue of people to assist them. So you know how sad a picture this is? That if you as a woman have to participate in the political process, you will need an army of people around you, because you need witnesses should anything unbecoming happen around you, or you will need protection, or you will need a ton of money to even be considered a valid candidate. It is not an unknown fact that when you want to join politics, you have to come with a certain amount of capital to be able to sustain yourself through the political process, right? And given the economic standing of women in India throughout, and even today, that's a tall ask, for female participation. So one can only imagine the routes that and the kind of work that people have to do to enter politics. And I think that's why you don't see a political science major joining politics.
No, I mean,
you see people from all sorts of professions where they've gained influence in their own fields coming into politics, right? That seems to be.
But I don't think you need a political science major to join politics. I don't feel like politics is a specialized field in that way.
No, I'm just saying it as a, you don't see someone who has studied and been in politics in a far more academic way and then has raised very few, like. I would say, who are the political female leaders in India who've been in politics right from the onset? Mamata Banerjee?
Few. And I know what you mean. And like, in fact, when I've covered elections, that, one thing you notice is that, like, when you see a young woman who is contesting and you wonder how she's made it there. And this is why I say, like, it's very rarely a woman on her own accord that makes it or tries her hand at Indian politics, because of the number of challenges in her ways. I don't blame the Indian woman largely for not even trying. But for instance, a lot of the women that are contesting are usually there because their father was the sitting MLA or the sitting MP, and he's got some criminal cases put against him, so he's debarred and he can't stand. So he'll put his daughter, he'll put his wife, So there are a lot of, like, the constituencies where, like, younger women are participating. The story is kind of that. So the vote isn't really for the woman, it's for, her father. So that's how the vote translates. But Indian politics is incredibly complicated, and, like, just the seat selection and the candidate list,
democracy.
The dance of democracy. And women themselves, we're not a homogenous group. Within us we have, Dalit women, and we have a caste and class distinction that is there as well, which has like an added marginalization for some people. That has its own politics to play out. So it is complicated, and I feel like to sort of like simplify it in this podcast is going to be impossible. But I think our attempt was just to sort of try and locate it in like the historical narrative to today, that women have overcome the odds in a way of a very patriarchal society to be like, hey, listen, we're here and we're going to try our hand at like counting for something.
It's an excellent study into how, in terms of gender, right, women issues were the first one to come on the table, to be understood by the legal frameworks of various countries and then put into place, right? And considering the times we live in right now, we can see the lifespan of how, from when you put in the legal regulations to include them in the whole part of the process, till when it actually starts happening in the country actively rather than passively, overcoming all the obstacles that we just talked about. That's essentially the lifespan of when a certain legal reform comes in and actual change takes effect. Right? And that could sort of apply to so many more different communities within the gender spectrum to a great extent, to understand as to how will their position in political participation also get sort of acknowledged or regularized or, understood also to a great extent, and access be given. But it does sadden me to a certain extent that once we have interrogated the matter, it's hard to actually go into details of the present day politicians as to what they are doing and how they got into it, because that just feels kind of weird for me to also talk about, like, oh, this person was a mistress of this person, that's why they got that kind of position. It feels like woman to woman. It just feels a bit like, I don't want to say it.
Patronizing.
And I don't want to say it because the story here is about how, even though access has been charted out to you, it's still super tedious.
Yes, and it's still difficult. I mean, that if that were not the case, then everybody's wife or everybody's daughter or everybody's sort of lover would be in politics. But the point is that even the women who have emerged, even if their original link is maybe to a man in politics, they've still fought their way there. They've still really overcome the odds to like reach where they have reached. And I think that is something that we cannot take away from them. I do not like this lazy argument of it being like, oh, she is just a proxy for the man, and we see this at every level. We see this even at, like I said, the Panchayati Raj level, where we're like, oh, the woman that is the sarpanch. I don't know if the term for the woman would be
but
sarpanch,
I totally get your point, because even working in different places that I have worked at, I've also noticed, especially in certain places where reservations are acknowledged into how they hire over there, I think people still discriminate against those people who come in through those reservations to a certain extent. And then this proxy thing also happens, this kind of narrative about people who were not always traditionally in that field of work and now have been included newly in that sort of discrimination still exists in this present day and age. I have witnessed it firsthand, and I find it very, very sort of sad for the women also coming in, because you also have these issues that happen, right? Women, when they go in extremely male-dominated places of work, how a process of desexualization starts, and she takes on this motherly, sort of garb when they go into work to feel a little bit more safer and secure, to be taken seriously, right? That also happens to a great extent. But I cannot help but fantasize that if there was a lot of women participation in most countries around the world, what would the world look like?
I know, let's
like,
imagine
what
that
would they focus on? I feel like they would focus a lot on good education, healthcare, nutrition, climate matters would be taken on very sensitively, because here is a person who knows how to run a mini kingdom, her home.
And I think good examples of countries where there's high level of women's participation, both in politics and even in terms of the elected candidates. The examples are, of course, like Sweden and Finland and Norway. And we know what societies in those countries are like. They're very egalitarian, like they focus on a lot, like you said, education, on life in the home.
Much higher standard of living.
High standards of living, better wage distribution, better focus on healthcare. Basic livelihood necessities, these are things that women tend to focus more about, because it is true, we do focus about the home. We care about like the world our children are going to grow up in.
Yeah.
Maybe more than, and this is such a stereotype, but it may be more than men do. And maybe if there were more women in politics, in sort of elected positions, we would see future. Like they say, the future is female. Aditya is going to hit me for saying this because, sorry, like hit me being a joke. Not actually.
This is a wrong podcast to crack that joke, Gayeti.
Let's not get him cancelled. Sorry, figuratively speaking, because he said he hates that terminology, the future is female, because he feels, and I agree with him, there is this pandering to the women's movement without it actually embodying the true principles of it. It's suddenly cool or woke to like, sort of like have a female lead in every film. It's suddenly like important to talk about women's participation or having like a woman head a company or whatever it might be, but in a very like sort of pandering way and not actually of substance, not in a way to really make a change. So, yeah, I feel like that is an important distinction to make as well. I don't think we want women in positions of leadership just for the sake of having that conversation. We want women who want to be there, who actually want to like, sort of work towards a different future for all of us. I think it would be a cool world to imagine, but I feel like we're really, really far away from it. I mean, we only have 10% of women in like elected positions in India right now in our Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So 10%. So we have a long, long way to go.
Yeah. Well, on that note, study hard, girls.
Now, on that note, at least let's like first start with at least casting our votes smartly.
Yes,
and, like,
I hope you have got your voter's ID card.
I have my voter's ID card. I need to change my address, and I think I need your help in like how that has to happen.
That can happen on the e-district website of the Delhi government.
Yeah, because it would be a shame.
Yeah,
like if
it's
I don't
multiple OTPs, girl.
Yeah, I will get to it.
Yeah,
I will get to
but
it.
But on that note, I think this has been a fantastic investigation into the role of women in the political process, and I feel like, given that it's a long way to go, I'm glad that you and me could dive deeper just to tell. I know what we will tell our children about how it happened and how hard women have fought.
I want to start a political party. We can like be like, I mean, forget the podcast. That can be our side hustle. Let's do it. Do you think, will anyone vote for us?
No.
Anyone?
Nobody will vote for us.
Come on. The journalist and the historian take on, not 2024, now 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
2029.
Vote for us, guys. Upcoming election. Not this one. The next one.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for tuning in.
And thank you for listening to us, and stay tuned for our next episode. And we're going to do an engagement in the middle. We really want everyone to participate in our podcast by putting through questions on the topic that we'll be taking, because we want to start taking audience questions as well.
And if we feel like we can't answer the questions, then we are going to get in an expert to sort of just weigh in and clarify things for us.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. We look forward to that, actually, talking to more people other than just you and me.
I love talking to you.
Me too. Yeah.
Bye, guys.